I'm a huge Narnia fan, and when I got the opportunity to head to New Zealand to do a costuming adventure, I decided I needed to make some Susan looks. Mainly Susan because I just really like what the costume designer did with her looks. So even though New Zealand usually rings the bells for Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, I definitely leaned the Narnia direction in my whole costuming adventure. I did make a Hobbit costume. There are some iconic scenes shot in New Zealand for the Narnia films. We'll get to more of that later on in my video series, but I got to go to some of those locations and wear my Susan replicas. Before we get ahead of ourselves, the base part of a costume needs to be created, and that's going to be a corset for these Susan looks. I ended up making 3 different looks for Susan, and all of them have the base of this corset that I'll be making in this video. The reason for a corset in a costume is to create the proper shape of that final piece. For many different costumes, a corset is the base to create that proper silhouette for that particular costume, and that corset design is based on that silhouette. Corsets come in many different styles. I will be basing mine off of historical corsetry with a little added touch of fantasy because Narnia and magical places and talking lines. The decision to make a corset was also helped along by some videos shared by Once a Narnian on Instagram showing the raid outfit pieces, which include a corset as a base for this look.
It's like 3.5 weeks before we leave. I feel like things are coming together as far as sourcing supplies, getting supplies dyed, and also making headway on things like weaving, finally. But I also got a corset, cut out. Cut out. And I didn't have to do a draft because this is a corset pattern that I have made before, and I just had to make some adjustments to it. Today, I'm hoping to just actually make something, and so I'm gonna plan to assemble the corset, hopefully fully.
I started at center front and then used the sandwich method to sew the seams. This is my go-to seams for corsets because it sews the outer fabric and the lining pieces all in one pass, plus contains the raw edges. Once sewn, the inner seam allowances are trimmed down, and the outer pieces of fabric are folded over, containing those raw edges, and this is ironed in place and creates your seam. After assembling the front pieces of the corset, I'm now placing the boning channels. There will be several placed throughout each panel, and these will be just sandwiched between the outer and lining fabrics, plus there will be channels placed right along each seam. Because I chose to do 2 lacings, one on each side just for a unique touch, this front section is now done and the edges need to be turned under. I'm doing a whip stitch sewing them together. I could have easily done a top stitch with my machine along this edge, but since I have all the time in the world, I like the look of a hand sewn edge, and it also guarantees I catch both edges within the seam. Poor excuses, I know, but I did it. Once finished, I sewed the boning channels along those lacing edges, plus decided to add some decorative element along the seams with this gold trim. This same process was completed with the back half of the corset, and it's onto placing grommets on all 4 edges. Once those grommets are all placed, the steel boning is cut to length and inserted.
My corset making and found this. Little Bingley, the sassy cat. She has taken residence on my corset. And this one, Winston, has taken up residence on my fabric. Yes. And these little puppies, they've joined me. I've got all the animals. That's true. I have the house to myself for this week. And so I will be just knocking a lot out, going into the living room, watching a ton of movies, and just getting a ton done. I look not that great, but it's okay. And yes, ow! See? Sassy! No! You don't do that! That really hurt. Gosh. She's an annoying cat. She's cute, but she's got a streak to her that's ridiculous. Her name is Bingley. It's Miss Bingley. But anyway. No, this is not for you. What I do with my boning is I always number my boning as I cut it as to which channel they go in, and that's really helpful after I've sanded the tips and dipped them, just to quickly know which ones go in which channels based on my measurements. At this point where the waistband is, I'm trying to make sure that the boning goes over the waistband, and so the waistband is closer to basically my skin and not the outside of the corset. I think this looks nicer, but also is better for the waist tape. This is the 7th day of week 2, and I can almost say that I've finished a project. I will be finishing these today, so I will finish one thing. Then I leather bound it just like I did with my 18th century stays, which I loved doing that so much, especially because I don't have to worry about the boning poking through my binding or fabric, which I've had happen in other corsets. And so with how you bind it, you kind of put double edge of leather at the top, and your boning goes all the way from the top to the bottom. And so the boning is going against the leather, which is much stronger than fabric. It's a little more elaborate than I had planned it to be, but you know me, I just keep adding stuff and make things harder for myself because of my perfectionist brain. Even though this is not a replica corset or anything, I still wanted to make it nice. Just, that's me. And that's what I like about creating fantasy type costumes, is because you can get creative with what you're doing and you're not stuck in the structure of trying to be historically accurate. It's looking good. This is my first project of the Narnian and New Zealand costumes that I can pretty much officially say it's done. It'll be finished later. I just wanted to talk to the camera right now versus later tonight when I'm finishing it up, because I am saving a lot of my hand sewing stuff to do in the living room while I'm watching all the Lord of the Rings and Hobbits and maybe the Narnians. Narnians, I always call it that, Narnias. But this makes me happy.
There you have a making of Susan's corset for the base of 3 different looks. Also, if you didn't know it, I have patterns listed on my shop for all of my different costume looks, or most of them, not all of them. This specific corset pattern is listed. You can go ahead to that listing in the description, and I'll also be coming out with different Narnia and Hobbit inspired patterns throughout this year, so stay tuned for that. And now we're gonna get to a section in this video where we talk about some costume details of these looks that I will be creating. So as I mentioned, I am making 3 different looks for Susan. They're all in the film Prince Caspian. The costumes are just great in the first one, but all the costumes in Prince Caspian just really draw my eye. They were just what I ended up choosing to make. The main dress of hers that I'm working on and spending the most time on, because I'm weaving the fabric, is her purplish dress that she wears for the majority of the Prince Caspian film. This outfit has so many unique details, and it's not something I realized until I started looking at pictures, and that's when I started looking at the fabric and how amazing it is. It's just so beautiful. It looks like a silk wool, and it has darker purple stripe, but in on display photos and I got photos from someone who owns part of this costume, sent photos, and it's actually a dark reddish stripe, not purple, which is really unique. But then the bodice, it doesn't feature the stripe, and it's a slightly lighter color with a slight texture to it. Now we're gonna talk about more details of this fabric in the next few videos because I am such a perfectionist when it comes to costume replicas. I spent hours and hours and hours and hours researching to find fabric that could work for this costume and couldn't find anything. There's nothing similar. So that's when I had the crazy idea that I should weave it. But anyway, the front of the bodice, we see a daffodil design that's a cutout from the bodice and then is backed with an orangish brown fabric. And looking up close, there's actually also gold designs on that orangish brown fabric. This whole cutout design is then lined with a goldish twisted embellishment. At the back, it's a unique lacing. It's a lace-up dress. We get a lacing that's wider at the top and then narrow at the bottom. It's hard to see because she's usually wearing her quiver. Also at the back, we see the unique sleeve design. This is especially noticeable when she's sleeping on the ground in the film and her arms are up. You see the blue fabric poking through. Now that is part of the underdress or undershirt that is poking through the sleeves because the purple sleeves are only sewn to about just above the elbow, and then it's open actually all the way down to the wrist, but then we have some string looking bands that tie the sleeve together right below the elbow and then right above the wrist. So it allows the sleeve to actually be a tighter fit than what you would usually want it to be because those openings allow your elbows to bend and creates much more mobility with the whole bodice design. Another unique part about these sleeves, if you look at the arm's eye shape at the back, it definitely has a big push into the bodice than you would usually see. It doesn't exactly follow the shoulder. I believe this is also for mobility. At the bottom of the bodice, we see these tabs all the way around that have little swoops, and then these are all edged with that same gold trim that you see in that center front cutout. The top neckline edge has a piping, and then the skirt design with the stripes, they're going vertical at the front. Towards the side, the stripe is then angled, and then again at the back, it's vertical. And so that helped me construct the whole pattern for the skirt based on those stripes. And so it's a much fuller, about half circle panel at the front, and so that's why the stripes end up angled at the side, and then the back is just a basic like skirt panel with the stripes up and down. And then of course a very noticeable part of this skirt design is the center front split. That's just a few inches below her waist, about hip length, and what is revealed underneath is secret pants, which is such a unique part about all these costumes featured in this film. They all have secret pants, and Lucy's also have secret pants. I love it. It's such a good design. But you don't notice the secret pants quite as much on this specific skirt because it has a front panel to those underpants that cover individual legs. I got some great photos from Once a Narnian, and I was able to get pictures of a costume that was worn in the movie by Anna Popwell, and I was able to get an idea of how those looked in real life without having to imagine, because for the most part we don't see that they're under there. And so that's where we can see that front panel is attached on the top, and then also that the secret pants are quite wide and full. The texture to this fabric looks to be like a Dupioni slub type weave. It's probably silk. It's also got a mix of either cotton or wool in it, I believe, or it's just a raw type of silk, so not as silky smooth. And then for the under bodice, so the part that we see poking out at the elbow and then also slightly at the neckline, this fabric is actually different than the underpants fabric. I thought this was really unique. It is slightly different color, and it's also a much smoother fabric, and it's probably also more lightweight, just based on the way it falls. Again, from Once a Narnian, owns the raid look, which we'll go into in just a moment, but that has the under blouse worn with the raid look. We can see a construction of it. The cuffs are slightly gathered. I should also mention, it's not a full bodice or shirt underneath, and and it has these panels coming off in different areas at the bottom, which I believe either hooks to the corset or somehow to the underpants beneath the corset. It's hard to tell how this was created to go together. Plus at the back, we see some holes and extra padding. This is most likely from either the quiver and how it hooks through the outfit to keep it stabilized, which there's much evidence of, or it's from wire work during stunts. And now for the other couple looks that I'm going to create. One of them is the raid look. The top bodice is taken off and is switched out for the leather corset. It has so many details on it, but also an addition is the leather gorget that is placed across the shoulders to protect shoulders from battle. This is just made out of leather lacing at the top of the shoulders and the back, and a V cut out at the front. So that's the main different part that is in this specific raid look. And then the leather corset part, or the body armor, is part of the final battle outfit. And so this is that same leather corset, but it has chainmail at the top and partly on the skirts. On the skirt itself actually has 2 slits in the front. Those splits open up and reveal secret pants in this look as well. So these pants, as far as what I could find, do not have the center front panel. The skirt itself is kind of creating a front panel cover. Now, these underpants are not super visible. We don't see much of it. Now, this red skirt, I believe, is a lighter weight wool. At the bottom, there is a gold design print to it. I do believe it's a print and not embroidery with the way the skirt moves and with the way that it's pretty worn off in some shots. And then another detail is the slits at the front are bound with a shinier red fabric. And then the underskirt fabric, this is something that I believe is probably the same-ish fabric that the bound edges are in, or it's just a smoother type fabric that's in a similar color. Then there's the obvious detail of the leather corset and the chainmail. Now we're gonna talk more about both of these things in future videos. They were both very challenging parts of this project because they were things that I had to learn to do in order to make them, and it was just a huge learning curve when it came to chainmail and leatherwork. But we will talk about the details of that leather corset later. There's so much going on in this leather corset with the different silver metal parts and the clasps and the strips and all that. It's just jam-packed with detail. And then the chainmail is something that I ended up making a majority of it. Crazy, but it is a very fine chainmail compared to regular, and it's also in a darker color. That sums up my findings. As I go and make them, I will share more details that I discovered as I made it, because that's how I usually end up discovering more details, is just as I'm making it, something doesn't make sense, and so I look at that one specific area better, and that's when a new detail emerges. Be on a lookout for the next few videos, which will be a theme of if you give Bella a cookie, you never know what she's gonna do. It might involve weaving fabric with miles and miles of threads, but also woodworking because I'm kind of sidetrackable. And anyway, stay tuned for that. As always, a huge thank you to my patrons, YouTube members, and Instagram subscribers for their continued support. You can get early access to all these videos as well as behind the scenes photos as I'm making my other projects. All these New Zealand projects were done last year, and I'm currently working on Wicked and Glinda looks, so that's what's gonna be on there, but you will get early access to all these New Zealand videos as they come out. Now go out there and learn, create, and inspire. And be sure to subscribe. Up my findings of these Cinderella outfits